What kind of empire dresses a boy in a bridal veil and calls him queen in the heart of Rome, where marble glistened under the Mediterranean sun and power was measured in blood? An emperor stood before the world and rewrote the boundaries of shame. The day would be remembered not for a war won or a treaty signed, but for a marriage that defied nature itself. And years later, when the silk was gone and the eyes of the city had turned away, the one they crowned would die as something less than human, abandoned like an animal no longer worth keeping. The last image is not of a throne, but of a body silent, cold, and emptied of the person it once held. No funeral procession wound through the streets. No marble marker bore the name. The same Rome that had once applauded in uneasy silence now looked away, eager to forget what it had seen. His name was Sporus. Once a boy with his own life and face, he was chosen for a cruel transformation. By order of the emperor, his body was altered, his identity stripped, until he became a living echo of a woman who had been dead for years. To Nero, it was an act of love twisted through grief and power. To Sporus, it was a life sentence disguised as a crown. From the first step down that marble aisle, his fate was not his own. The same empire that celebrated his wedding would stand by when his end came, and history would leave us with a question it never answered. Did Sporus die as a queen, or as a boy the empire had broken? Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus was born into a dynasty where bloodline meant both privilege and peril. Adopted by Emperor Claudius at the urging of his mother Agrippina the Younger, Nero ascended to the throne at just 17, the youngest emperor in Roman history. At first, his reign showed promise. He reduced taxes, promoted public entertainment, and courted the goodwill of the Senate. The people cheered for a ruler who seemed to understand them. Yet beneath the polished marble of his public image, darker currents moved. Power in Rome was never stable, and Nero's position rested on the fragile balance between political alliances, military loyalty, and his own restless desires. The death of his mother marked a turning point. Agrippina, once his greatest supporter, had become an obstacle. Historical accounts from Tacitus and Suetonius describe how Nero orchestrated her assassination, an act that shocked even the hardened elite of Rome. From then on, Nero's rule began to tilt toward indulgence and paranoia. The emperor was no longer content to simply govern. He sought to control not just the state, but the very narrative of his life. Art, music, and theatrical performances became his obsessions. He saw himself not only as Rome's ruler, but as its greatest artist, deserving of an audience that spanned the empire. Then came Poppaea Sabina. Known for her beauty and ambition, she became the center of Nero's world. She was not merely a consort. She was a symbol of the elegance and refinement Nero wanted to project. Their relationship was a blend of passion and politics, strengthening his hold on power while feeding his vanity. Poppaea's influence grew, and so did Nero's dependence on her presence. Rome whispered about their life together, the golden couches, the perfumed banquets, the nights lit by 100 oil lamps as music floated through the palace halls. But in the year 65 AD, tragedy struck. Poppaea, pregnant with their child, died suddenly. Ancient sources disagree on the cause, but many record a chilling account in a fit of anger. Nero kicked her, ending both her life and the unborn child's. Whether the tale is literal or a product of hostile historians, Her death left an undeniable void in Nero's life. The emperor, once surrounded by admirers and courtiers, now found himself haunted by the absence of the woman he had placed at the center of his world. In the months that followed, Nero's grief twisted into something dangerous. His public appearances grew erratic, his private indulgences darker. He sought replacements for Poppaea, but none could match the image he carried in his mind. This was not mere longing for a companion. It was an obsession to recreate her, to summon her beauty and grace back from the grave through sheer will and imperial power. And in Rome, the will of the emperor was a force that could change laws, lives, and even bodies. The city itself reflected Nero's state of mind. It was a place of spectacle and cruelty, where gladiators fought to the death in the morning and senators debated laws in the afternoon. The boundaries between entertainment and brutality were thin, and the emperor blurred them further. In this world, nothing was sacred if it could be turned into a performance. And when Nero's gaze fell upon someone who reminded him of Poppaea, the machinery of imperial authority began to move. The stage was being set for one of the strangest and most disturbing transformations in Roman history. Porus was a youth whose life might have passed unnoticed had fate not placed him in the path of the emperor. Ancient historians such as Cassius Dio and Suetonius offer only fragments about his origins. But one fact stands out in every account. His face and bearing bore an uncanny resemblance to the late Empress Poppaea Sabina. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his mouth, and the quiet elegance in his movements seemed to echo her presence. In the bustling streets of Rome, this likeness might have been a curiosity. Inside the imperial palace, it became a dangerous kind of destiny. When Nero first saw him, it was not as one man meeting another. It was the gaze of a ruler who believed his will could bend the world. The emperor's grief for Poppaea had hardened into an obsession that blurred the lines between mourning and possession. In Sporus, he saw the possibility of resurrecting what death had taken from him. This was not a choice offered to the youth. It was a command issued from the highest power in the empire. The order for castration was carried out with the full authority of imperial decree. In Rome, such an act was more than a mutilation. It was a stripping away of identity in a society where masculinity defined social worth. The physical pain was immediate and brutal. The deeper wound was the erasure of the life he had known. With a single act, his body, his name, and the course of his future were irrevocably altered. When the physical scars began to heal, a second transformation began. Palace attendants dressed him in silks, adorned him with jewels, and styled his hair in the fashion once worn by Poppaea. The empress's gowns, kept in guarded storage, were brought out and fitted to his frame. Servants addressed him in the tones reserved for royalty. He was taught how to move with measured grace, how to speak with calculated softness, and how to carry himself as though every gesture were a deliberate act of statecraft. Publicly, he appeared at the emperor's side in a role that blurred reality and performance. Nero presented him as a living embodiment of the woman he had lost. In private, the pressure was constant, for the illusion had to be perfect. Every expression, every step, every tilt of the head was scrutinized. The court played its part in maintaining the fiction, and the Senate remained silent. In the shadow of imperial power, disbelief became dangerous. This transformation of Sporus into a reflection of another person was not merely an eccentric whim of a grieving emperor. It was a demonstration of the reach of absolute authority. A youth of unknown background had been turned into a symbol, a possession, and a weapon to challenge the sensibilities of Rome. His own identity had been buried under layers of silk and expectation. Yet this was only the prelude to the next act. Nero's intentions moved inevitably toward a public union that would leave even the most jaded citizens of the empire in stunned silence. The wedding was unlike any Rome had witnessed. It was not held in the secrecy of a private chamber, but in full view of the imperial court and selected witnesses whose presence would ensure the event became part of the city's collective memory. Nero stood dressed in the robes of a groom, his eyes fixed on the figure beside him. Sporus appeared veiled, adorned in the garments and jewels of an empress, the silk shimmering under the torchlight. Every detail was crafted to echo the image of Poppaea Sabina, down to the arrangement of the hair and the cut of the gown. The ceremony followed the forms of a traditional Roman marriage, with vows exchanged and a dowry symbolically presented. Though the bride was a youth who had once walked the streets as an ordinary citizen. The court applauded, but the sound was hollow. Many of those present understood the unspoken command behind their smiles. To question the union was to question the emperor's will, and in Nero's Rome such defiance was a dangerous luxury. The senators kept their eyes lowered. The officers of the Praetorian Guard maintained rigid composure, and the attendants performed their duties with studied precision. Outside the palace walls, whispers carried through the marketplaces and taverns, but no voice dared to rise in open criticism. In the months that followed, Sporus accompanied Nero at public events as though he were a legitimate empress. He appeared in the imperial box at the games, stood beside the emperor during processions, and attended banquets where foreign dignitaries were introduced to him as the consort of Rome's ruler. The illusion was maintained with unwavering discipline. Courtiers addressed him with honorifics. Artists painted him in the style reserved for imperial women, and poets composed verses that likened his beauty to divine figures. To the wider empire, the message was unmistakable. Nero was a sovereign whose authority extended not only over the provinces and the legions, but over the very definitions of identity and tradition. Yet behind the polished surface of ceremony, the atmosphere within the palace grew tense. For Sporus, each public appearance was a reminder of the role forced upon him. The grandeur of the surroundings could not conceal the isolation that came from living as a fabrication. Servants avoided lingering in his presence, unsure whether to offer pity or to maintain the distance expected of them. Conversations ended abruptly when he entered a room, as though his very existence carried an unspoken warning. Nero seemed invigorated by the disquiet his marriage produced. For him, the union was a statement of absolute power. By placing Sporus at his side, he was declaring that he could remake the world in his own image, that the empire would bend to his desires without question. Some historians suggest that the spectacle served as a form of political theater, an assertion that the emperor's will was beyond the reach of custom or moral constraint. Others see it as the act of a man consumed by personal grief and delusion. Whatever the truth, the effect was the same. The wedding cemented Sporus's place in a court where admiration was feigned and loyalty was born of fear. As seasons changed, the grandeur of the ceremonies did little to soften the underlying reality. Sporus had no allies at court who could shield him from the emperor's whims. His life revolved around appearances that were designed not for his sake, but to serve Nero's narrative. The same veil that had concealed his face at the wedding now served as a symbol of his erasure. Behind it was not the reborn Poppaea that Nero claimed to have restored, but a person whose own story had been silenced. This public life, built on performance and control, could not last without consequence. Every banquet, every procession, and every forced smile tightened the web in which Sporus was trapped. The same court that applauded his wedding would one day stand by as his fortunes shifted. For in Rome, favor was fleeting, and the emperor's protection could vanish overnight. The illusion had been crafted to perfection, but illusions are fragile things, and the next turn of power would test how long it could endure. Sporus's decline began without drama, a slow dimming that the court learned to ignore. The endless strain of living as someone else pressed into his body until the fine robes and jeweled crowns felt like chains. His frame thinned, his steps lost their former ease, and the gold-threaded gowns pulled at his shoulders with every movement. Under the harsh Mediterranean light, hours of standing beside the emperor drained what little strength he had left. The demands never ceased. Appearances filled his days, leaving no space for rest. Meals were hurried or abandoned altogether. Heavy perfumes clung to him until they made him dizzy, and the layers of cosmetics meant to perfect his image left his skin raw. Even his voice, trained to speak softly in the measured tones of an empress, grew rough from constant repetition. The mind suffered more than the body. Every waking moment was shadowed by the need to uphold an illusion. Sleep became fractured, haunted by the thought that one misplaced gesture could bring punishment. Solitude was impossible. Even in his chambers, attendants lingered, their presence a reminder that no space belonged entirely to him. He could not think, move, or breathe without measuring himself against the emperor's expectations. Signs of his decline became harder to hide. Courtiers dabbed rouge on his pale cheeks, arranged elaborate hairstyles to cover thinning hair, and wrapped him in fabrics bright enough to distract from the stiffness in his movements. Whispers about his fading health flickered through the palace but vanished quickly in the air of fear that governed every conversation. No one dared speak to him of what they saw. Yet the deepest wound was not visible. The distance between who he had been and who he was forced to become had grown unbridgeable. The boy who might have laughed freely in the streets of Rome was gone, replaced by a figure sculpted for display. His days were measured in ceremonies that hollowed him further, each smile and bow a surrender of the self. In the glare of the banquet's torches, the music now sounded muted, the laughter insincere. All that remained was a figure robed in splendor, but emptied from within, a living testament to how power can destroy without striking a single blow. His was not a death dealt in an instant, but an unending erosion, as precise and deliberate as the role that had been forced upon him. The death of Nero in 68 AD should have freed Sporus, but Rome's corridors of power had never been a place where survival was guaranteed. The emperor's suicide ended a reign of excess and fear. Yet it also unleashed a period of violent instability known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Each ruler who claimed the purple sought to secure legitimacy and eliminate threats. And in this shifting landscape, Sporus was not seen as an innocent survivor. He was an ornament tied to the image of a fallen ruler, and in the politics of Rome, that made him a prize as much as a liability. Otho, the man who seized power after Galba's short-lived rule, took Sporus into his household. Ancient sources suggest that Otho, who had once been married to Poppaea before she became Nero's wife, regarded Sporus with the same unsettling fascination as Nero had. He treated the youth with the honors due to an empress, presenting him at court as a symbol of continuity between his reign and the previous one. For Sporus, this was not liberation, but a change in master. The silks and jewels remained, as did the obligation to appear at the ruler's side. The role had shifted from being Nero's consort to Otho's possession, yet the essential truth remained unchanged. His identity belonged to someone else. Otho's rule was brief. His suicide, following defeat by Vitellius, marked another turn in the cycle of imperial chaos. Vitellius, a man known for his appetite for cruelty, saw in Sporus an opportunity for entertainment that revealed the depths of Rome's moral decay. Historical accounts claim that Vitellius planned to force Sporus to take part in a public spectacle called the bridal ceremony of the Furies. In this grotesque performance, Sporus would be dressed as a bride and subjected to humiliation before a crowd, a living parody of both gender and power. It was to be an act designed not only to degrade him, but to amuse the spectators with the destruction of his dignity. For Sporus, this was the final breaking point. The years of survival under imperial control had stripped him of much, but not the awareness of what such a spectacle would mean. To be displayed in that manner before the people of Rome would be to erase the last fragment of self he still possessed. Faced with the certainty of public degradation, he chose to take his own life. Ancient historians differ on the details, but the consensus is that he ended his existence before Vitellius could carry out his plan. His death was not marked by ceremony. There was no state funeral, no mourning declared in the city. The man who had been called an empress by two emperors left the world as quietly as he had entered it. His body claimed not by the honor of Rome, but by the silence it reserved for those it preferred to forget. In the imperial records, he is a brief mention, a footnote to the reigns of others. Yet his story reveals the truth about the nature of power in Rome. It was a force that could raise a person to the heights of imperial display and, with equal ease, cast them into the depths of humiliation or oblivion. In the end, Sporus's fate after Nero's death was shaped by the same forces that had defined his life in the palace. He was never free to be himself. Every change in ruler meant a change in the terms of his captivity, until there was nothing left to surrender. His final act was the only choice he could claim entirely as his own, a refusal to allow another ruler to dictate the terms of his existence or the manner of his end. It was a small defiance in the face of overwhelming control, but it ensured that the last decision about his body and his identity would belong to him. Sporus's story did not vanish with his death. It lingers in symbols scattered through time, faint but unyielding. In some forgotten stall of ancient Rome, a length of pale fabric may once have hung, perhaps the same veil placed upon his head before an empire. No inscription marked it. No guard protected it. It existed as an object stripped of meaning to all but history itself. The ruins of the Palatine still hold fragments of stone and gilt, remnants of Nero's palace where Sporus once stood under torchlight. These artifacts do not speak, yet their silence tells of a court where power could exalt a person to imperial display and then erase them without trace. The absence of Sporus in Rome's official record is not oversight, but design. It is the final act of control to remove a name so completely that it survives only in whispers from hostile historians. He remains a shadow, not the empress the emperors displayed, nor the boy who once walked freely, but a symbol of how authority can seize a body, a life, and even memory itself. The stones of Rome still carry the weight of footsteps never meant to be remembered. Among them is his. Here, at the torture throne, we walk those same stones, seeking the voices power tried to bury. Because every silence hides a story, and every shadow begins with a figure the world chose to forget. Stay with us, and we will bring those figures back into the light.